Lecture 6, The Spectre of Thomas Hobbes.
Welcome to Lecture 6, The Spectre of Thomas Hobbes. And I say the spectre of Hobbes because there is a remarkable drama to the fate of Thomas Hobbes in 17th and indeed 18th century thought. He is a figure philosophically, metaphysically, without many followers at all, and yet his philosophy will haunt the second half of the 17th and the first half of the 18th centuries. Even without there being Hobbists, Thomas Hobbes sets the terms of so many debates. Why could that possibly be the case? First, 17th century minds are educated to view themselves as disputants, logicians, people afraid of no argument, no objection. Central to education in the 17th century is the view that before you have demonstrated what you yourself wish to prove, you must formulate and overcome any possible objection of any strength to what it is that you're seeking to assert. So that 17th century thinkers view the process of formal knowledge as one in which you never abandon the field to an argument against yourself. Indeed, in which the very pride of learning is that you overcome the strongest arguments that have been made to what you yourself believe or are teaching. And formal thought simply would not abandon the field to Thomas Hobbes. Indeed, it became the test of a system of philosophy to see if it could overcome the problems that Hobbes's philosophy posed. Hobbes also haunts the 17th and early 18th centuries because it is useful to philosophers to brand their opponents as Hobbists and to find similarities between Hobbes and their rivals. Aristotelians will love to point out what they are convinced are affinities between Cartesians and Thomas Hobbes in order to blacken the reputation of the Cartesians, even though Cartesian debate with Hobbes is one of the central dramas of the 17th century. So Hobbes becomes a presence in all early modern debate, a set of objections that must be overcome and a set of unacceptable conclusions that one must prevent one's opponents from tarring oneself with. Today, Hobbes is most widely read for his political philosophy, his theory of the social contract, and his defense of absolutism in his celebrated work, The Leviathan. But it was, above all, his theories of knowledge, language, being, and ethics that so set the early modern world on edge. Indeed, one cannot begin to understand Hobbes as a political philosopher, to understand the design and goal of organizing the state in accord with a certain view of human nature in the Leviathan, unless one understands Hobbes's more fundamental philosophy, and also even to understand the motivation that leads to the Leviathan in Hobbes. One must understand that the goal of philosophy sets the goal of the state for Hobbes, philosophy is a means to human survival. It is a means to the reduction of human suffering. It is a means to human well-being. And that is why the political philosophy of Hobbes is premised upon the notion that what justifies a state is its contribution to that civil peace upon which he believes our physical survival depends. This essentially Baconian view that the goal of philosophy is to decrease human suffering and enhance human well-being is a widespread one in the 17th century and dramatically in contrast, in a secular context, to the contemplative goal of Aristotelian scholasticism. Descartes as well, in his own work, said that the ultimate goal of philosophy was to provide a human medicine, knowledge of the real world used to decrease pain and increase well-being. Hobbes, to be understood as a metaphysician, has to be understood in terms of the convergence of three schools of thought that often exist as strains of thought or moments of thought in the 17th century, but that in the case of Hobbes are brought together and synthesized into a powerful and dramatic philosophical system. Empiricism, the belief that what knowledge we have is acquired from our experience of the world. Materialism, the belief that all that we know is matter and the behavior of material entities. And determinism, the belief that there is no freedom in the world, that all things occur necessarily determined by prior causes. One good place to begin with Thomas Hobbes is in his objection to René Descartes. Before Descartes' Meditations were published, Descartes' close friend, a minim monk by the name of Morin Mersenne, circulated the manuscript of the Meditations to people whom he thought of as leading or critical thinkers in Europe, and asked them to write objections to Descartes' arguments in the Meditations, and the first edition of the Meditations contained those objections and Descartes' replies to them. Very few of us published texts that way in the 20th century. Hobbes' objection to Descartes' most central proposition is a window into his thought. Descartes, he wrote, was wrong to draw the conclusion, I think, therefore I am. Rather, Hobbes wrote, Descartes should have concluded, I think, therefore matter is capable of thought. End quote. I think, therefore matter is capable of thought. What had Descartes done, Hobbes writes? He had taken the human actor, body, organism, one of its behaviors, and declared that behavior a separate substance. It would be, Hobbes explained, as if one said, I walk, therefore there exists walking substance, independent of my body. I run, therefore there exists running substance, independent of my body. No philosopher confuses the subject and its acts. And what we knew, Hobbes urged, from our experience was that the physical beings, human beings, thought. Therefore, matter was capable of thought. Underlying Hobbes' argument is his core belief that we only can conceive of corporeal, that is to say, material entities and their behaviors, and that our language and our ontology, our theory of being, must follow from that knowledge. For Hobbes, epistemology, correctly understood, a theory of knowledge that is coherent, produces a materialistic, ontological language, a language about being and about the things that exist, that is wholly material. What are Hobbes' premises and arguments? For Hobbes, all ideas enter the mind through the senses. Aristotle, by the way, had said that as well. All ideas enter the mind through the senses. It is obvious for Hobbes that our five senses are physical. What affects the physical senses does so through physical contact and must be physical. I can only think of things of which my senses make me aware. But I can only see things that strike the optic nerve. They must be physical. Or the otic nerve. They must be physical. My sense of touch, my sense of smell. For Hobbes, all the senses being physical and all ideas arising via the senses, all of our ideas are caused by bodies and their actions that affect the five senses. Materialism, then, for Hobbes, is the only alternative to speaking, in the most literal sense of this word, nonsense. Of speaking nonsense. What is a word? A word for Hobbes is a sign or a mark that represents a physically caused sensory impression. And every word marks and summons to memory and mind either a physical entity or the behavior of a physical entity. A word that does not have a material sensory referent is a mere sound. That's Hobbes' phrase. A mere sound. Or, literally and figuratively, a word he loves, nonsense. Think of its literal meaning. Whatever emotions it evokes in us. For example, if growing up as a child, every time I did something good, my mother or my father said, Gribbleflix loves you. You've pleased Gribbleflix. Or, if I do something wrong, Gribbleflix will make you sick. Gribbleflix is angry. You've displeased Gribbleflix. And I say, what is Gribbleflix? And someone says, well, you can't see it, touch it, feel it, taste it, smell it. It well might be that at 20, 40, 60, or 80, hearing the sound Gribbleflix, I feel the most powerful emotions. But the word represents, signifies nothing. It is, in another of Hobbes' favorite terms, insignificant speech. So, Hobbes writes, the entire language of spiritual or immaterial being is nonsense. It has no meaning. Notions such as soul or ghost or immaterial being either are metaphors for material entities. I feel his spirit, meaning I'm aware of his memory. Or when Hobbes defends himself against charges of irreligious atheism, he says the Spirit of God must mean the wind. That's what could move upon the waters. No spirit, but a wind. We use language metaphorically. But notions such as soul or ghost or immaterial being, something without body, something that does not physically strike the senses, either are metaphors or they are gibberish. What does that do to our understanding of God? Since every philosopher rushes in to accuse Hobbes of atheism. Hobbes makes two arguments, the sincerity of which you are free to discern for yourself. The first is that since we can have no notion of an immaterial being, those who say that they know God is an immaterial being, they are the real atheists, for they believe in something that is a self-contradiction and that cannot exist. Hobbes' second argument is that there simply is no understanding of God. And to call him a spirit, to call him an immaterial being, is to betray an arrogance and an attempt to understand the incomprehensible. Reverence of the incomprehensible, he will write, is an appropriate religious response. And the correct answer to what is God is an incomprehensible being whom I worship and adore. To say a spirit, an incorporeal entity, is to utter nonsense. Hobbes also accounts for belief in God by saying that it makes sense for people to look for causes and then for causes of those causes, and thus to imagine a first cause. And that first cause people identify as God. It is that people mean by God. The case for Hobbes' atheism that is made so dramatically in the 17th century is that having said that any cause must be material, that Hobbes has given us a corporeal first cause, labeled it God. That's not incomprehensible. That's saying that matter is the ultimate cause of the universe, and that, his critics will argue, is atheism. During the English Civil War, when the Puritans attempted to do away with the institution of the bishops, the Royalists replied, "No bishops, no king." And several leading critics of Hobbes in the late 17th century will write, "No spirit, no God." If we do not believe in the existence of immaterial being, we do not believe in the existence of God. So Hobbes is an empiricist. All ideas enter the mind via the senses. He is a materialist. All that we know are corporeal entities and their activities. And, as I said, he is a determinist. For Hobbes, if the reality that we alone know is body, then number and geometry, which are fixed and necessary relationships and govern quantitative relationships, govern the behavior of matter. Like Descartes and like Galileo, matter for Hobbes is quantity and shape. It is measurable mass, measurable motion, and geometrical form. And the relationships that govern numbers and geometry are fixed and necessary relationships. There is no freedom when you triangulate as to that third line and its angle. To demonstrate something mathematically is to demonstrate it with certainty, because mathematical quantitative relationships are fixed. And thus Hobbes concludes, nature, which is wholly material, is governed by laws which are both mechanistic and wholly determined. There is no uncaused event. There is no chance. There is no freedom in the world. What is most dramatic about Hobbes for his contemporaries is that he unabashedly extends this empirical, materialistic determinism full force to his philosophy of man, of human life. Advancing explicit theories of materialism and ethical relativism with reference to all human existence. We are physical organisms. The brain is a physical agent governed by the laws of nature. We are a natural material mechanism. If that is the case, we, as are all other beings, are matter in motion according to the fixed laws of mechanics. It follows from that for Hobbes absolutely that there is no such thing as free will. What we experience as free will is the organism first weighing more profit in A or more profit in B. Maybe A, maybe B. And we experience that as choice. But when the organism is directed toward that which makes it feel less pain and more pleasure, it is ineluctably, determinedly drawn toward that. That calculation may be hard to make. Should I spend my life with her? Shouldn't I? Should I seek this cure? Shouldn't I? And we experience that as free choice, as free will. But the reality is, it is the organism weighing its options, an organism that will be determined by a governing mechanism. That governing mechanism in human beings, for Hobbes, is pleasure and pain. That is the mechanism. Ego psychology, pleasure and pain are the cause of human action. All organisms seek pleasure and flee pain. With that mechanism understood, all of human behavior falls into place. But to seek pleasure and to flee pain is not necessarily to know the real causes of well-being or the real causes of pain. So in Hobbes' formulation, all organisms seek what they believe will cause pleasure and flee what they believe will cause pain, which is why Hobbes will conclude opinion rules the world. The human organism is deterministically compelled to seek what it believes will be the cause of pleasure, and religions have recognized this. What is the pleasure offered as a result of foregoing certain earthly pleasures that would seem to contradict Hobbes? An eternity of happiness. And what happens if you accept earthly pleasures at cost of your duty? An eternity of pain. And if people believe something causes pleasure or pain, those beliefs determine their behaviors. Without a threat of punishment for harming others, that drive of seeking pleasure and fleeing pain would produce in all human beings the use of all other human beings as instruments of their own pleasure, which would produce, in Hobbes's unforgettable phrase, the war of all against all, end quote, in which life is, in Hobbes's yet more unforgettable phrase, nasty, poor, solitary, brutish, and short. Without the threat of punishment for harming others, the pleasure-pain mechanism that governs us would produce, paradoxically, that which would make us most unhappy. A life that is, it sounds like an attorney's firm, nasty, poor, solitary, brutish, and short. Given the unbearability of that condition, that we would always have to be on our guard, that we would always live in fear of our neighbor, that at any moment we could be enslaved or our life snuffed out, we seek knowledge and we seek social relations that will reduce our danger, that will make life something of well-being and security, as opposed to the war of all against all. And that is the goal of philosophy, real knowledge of real causes, so that we may seek what in fact we really desire, our well-being, which cannot be achieved in the war of all against all, and that is the goal of the state. Given that model of a pleasure-pain mechanism that governs all of human life, Hobbes reaches categorically relativistic conclusions about human ethics. All that we mean by good is that which we believe will lead to our happiness. All that we mean by evil is that which we believe will lead to our suffering and pain. Thus, for Hobbes, there is no goodness and evil in and of themselves. There is only good and evil in relationship to the human condition and the contribution of something to human happiness or human suffering. Indeed, Hobbes will write, what we mean by the goodness of God is His goodness toward us. We have no other meaning for the term. For Hobbes, the benefit of philosophy is that absent real knowledge of real causes, absent honest knowledge of ourselves and our natural condition, we are doomed to that our whole organism rebels against: a life of mutual war, of pain, of insecurity, of strife. Crops ruined in civil war, families destroyed, the work of a lifetime wiped out, nothing durable, nothing safe. But an honest knowledge of the nature of being, the nature of causes, the nature of knowledge, and the nature of human beings alone can give us that insight into our condition that can lead, through its application in politics and indeed in all of life, to the improvement of the human condition. The century hears those arguments and recoils. Thank you.